Hi, my name is Daniel. This is my co-host Omar. Welcome to our show where we explore the fight and fighters. We're not talking about what just happens in the ring or in the cage, but the psychological, the spiritual, and the emotional fights that we encounter in our lives. Normally, we like to profile the heart in the fighters, but this time, this episode, we are going to be focusing on the fight.
Today, we'll be previewing UFC 254 Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Justin Gaethje for a much-anticipated bout between the undefeated, undisputed lightweight champ and the highlight reel, the man known to bring the violence. Here to help us break it down, current Streetbeefs Westcoast fighter with a record of 1-1, a husband, a father, and a working man, Lil Deezo. Welcome to the show, Lil Deezo.
Hey, what's up, you guys? Thanks for having me on.
When we think about this fight, right, this has been, it seems like a fight in the making for a long time, right? Especially when Gaethje got into the UFC, there was like, whoa, this guy really brings a fight. But then as he begins to progress in his career, it seemed like they were on the trajectory to match up. And so I'm curious, like, how excited are you about this fight?
Yeah, I'm excited and I'm a little nervous because Justin Gaethje has always been one of my favorite fighters, and so is Khabib, my bad. So it's like watching two of your best friends fight, you know?
What makes you like Justin Gaethje? Is there anything in particular about him that you really grasp to?
I like him because he is just always constantly pushing forward, even when he's completely tired. And, I really respect that. And that's something that I really want to emulate myself, and I try to do at least.
Yeah, what's interesting is that they both do that, right? They both employ this kind of heavy pressure style, which is something that we actually see in your fights as well, right? It's this idea of I'm going to pressure and pressure and pressure until you break someone. And so someone as a fighter like yourself, like, what is that like to push someone until they break?
It's very tough because at the same time, you're pushing yourself also. So it's like, yes, you're pushing the pressure on the other person, trying to make them tired, but you might be already at the point where you're more tired than they are, you know? And you have to find a way to push yourself to continue to fight in order to break them down. And it's daunting, you know? Those 30 seconds, they feel like 30 minutes when you're at that point. So it's tough.
And if you were to compare the type of pressure, what do you think is different between the way that Justin Gaethje pressures folks versus Khabib?
That's a good question. Justin's pressure it's more in your face with, punches and leg kicks. And that's painful. That's really painful. So I feel like the difference is, while Khabib's striking is good, it's not as painful to get shot on with the takedown attempt for 5 rounds. But that's probably the main difference. Is Justin Gaethje's approach is more painful up front.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good way of putting it, right? Because when I look at the way that they fight, that's certainly what registers for me is like, oh yeah, that looks painful. That kind of pressure, because we're not talking about just like, as you said, when I'm shooting in on you and then I apply the pressure when you're on the mat. But this kind of pressure is like, as you stand in front of me, you're going to feel my bones clash into your bones. You're going to feel me punch you. You're going to feel me kick you. You're going to feel me cutting you off the ring. And so it's certainly that the styles of pressure are certainly different. But as you mentioned it is painful when you get the pressure from Justin Gaethje. So let's take a look at the offense. What do you think are some really important keys for Justin to win? And then after that, we'll go into Khabib. What are his strengths?
Constant pressure, constant pain. No time to settle
That's an interesting point you make. A lot has been made of Justin Gaethje's evolution, right? In particular in the UFC. Coming into the UFC, he was exactly as you described him. He put the pressure. He came forward and he was willing to take a punch to give a punch, right? And we've heard that from other fighters. And it certainly was true with Justin Gaethje. You're oftentimes seeing Justin Gaethje like bloody and just beat up, but equally the opponent was as bloody or asleep on the mat, right? And that was sort of his strategy coming in. He would come forward. He would hardly ever, if never, take a step backwards. And then we seen after the two losses, both with Dustin Poirier and
Eddie
Perez. Thank you. After those two losses, you start to see a different Justin Gaethje, right? And I think a lot of that is attributed to his boxing coach and striking coach, Trevor Whitman. And so you start to see a more calculated or more patient Justin Gaethje, a Gaethje who's actually willing to go backwards, right, or slip a punch in order to give a punch versus take a punch to give a punch. It's an interesting point you make because some folks might say, well, if you pressure, then you're giving Khabib the opportunity to take you down. Do you still think that the pressure moving forward is a correct strategy versus where Gaethje is now, this evolved Gaethje, which is much more patient, willing to go backwards, not willing to always put the pressure forward?
If you notice in the Tony Ferguson fight, the pressure was still there. He just wasn't overcommitting to his shots. They were calculated, like you said. Trevor Whitman said, I need you to take 10% off of every shot. So he started throwing them, with not less intent, but he wasn't like winging them out there. He was throwing almost just as much. It's just that he wasn't trying to, knock Tony Ferguson's head off with every shot. And there was a couple times where he had him hurt, and he didn't just pounce on him like he would have before. So I feel like the pressure's still there. It's just more calculated.
Yeah, I mean that's a good way of saying it, right? He was more calculated. Even in the Ferguson fight, you saw in the first round that Justin got dropped towards the end of the first round, right? And Trevor had to remind him, let's be calculated. Let's not throw everything in the sink this first round. I need you to move. I need you to roll, right? And so certainly when you look at the evolution of Justin Gaethje, you see that he's learning to be more patient. He's learning to make sure he's being more calculated. And for me, I'm thinking, okay, if they go into this fight, does Khabib allow him to be that? Does Khabib allow him to be patient? Does Khabib allow him to be calculated? And from my observation, I don't think he will. I think Khabib will pressure him to force Justin Gaethje to punch, force Justin Gaethje to get into this kind of brawl style that he's been known to have. So I'm curious to see what kind of strategies that they will employ to help offset some of that pressure from either fighter. Like, I wonder if Khabib is not going to be as aggressive. Because what does that, like, if you think about the way that Khabib fights, do you feel like if he doesn't come out with that much pressure, do you think it changes the trajectory of the fight?
It can, yeah, I think so, because if Justin, like how I mentioned before, he doesn't let you settle. But if Khabib ends up letting Justin settle and catch his flow, it could be dangerous. But at the same time, Khabib, his pressure is intense as well. He has good striking as well, so there's no counting him out. And I think if they do get into a brawl type scenario, that might not be the best strategy for Khabib, because he might get caught.
Well, what's interesting about Khabib is that I think he wants people to get into brawl mode because then he can shoot. Because when I look at these matchups, it's really interesting because, I studied Justin Gaethje, but also I studied Khabib. And so what Justin Gaethje does is it's very similar to what Nick Diaz and Nate Diaz do. They force you to throw punches. And then what Justin Gaethje does is that once you start punching, he actually steps back for a little bit and then returns fire because he wants you to overcommit. But not only that, what they both want to do is they want to have contact. It's just interesting to see that both of them were going to rely on the other person getting into a brawl. Gaethje's definitely going to want him to brawl so he can knock him out. and Khabib's gonna want him to brawl so he can take him down. All right, and so who do you think will be the first one to bite? If you were to put your money up, who do you think will be the first one to bite on this?
It just depends how good Justin Gaethje is feeling. If he's feeling amazing, he might be the first one to bite just because he's having too much fun. I don't think Khabib's gonna. I don't think he would bite at all. Khabib. I think he might act like he's gonna bite, but I don't think he would stay in that zone for very long. I think he would shoot right away if they start brawling, like you said.
Well, the thing about the shooting aspect of Khabib, he finds more success when you're against the gate, and so when he shoots in the middle of the ring, he's actually not that successful at all. And so a lot of what he tries to do is set up his offense so that he can push you against the gate. I mean, but it's certainly going to be interesting because I think pressure is probably the most important aspect of this entire fight. I think that would dictate the outcome. Who is the one going to be dominating the pressure?
Most fight fans, right, UFC fans, are folks who've been following these two fighters, in particular Justin Gaethje, right? We know that he has some devastating leg kicks. Like his leg kicks are, oh my God, you can hear those things slap. I'm wondering, have you ever been kicked in the legs like that? And if so, what is that like?
No, I've never been kicked in the leg like that before.
Even though you may have not been kicked, maybe especially not like a Justin Gaethje type of kick, but nonetheless, like how important do you think those leg kicks are going to be in this fight?
They're going to definitely be a huge factor in my opinion, because I mean, just look at the Tony Ferguson fight, Justin Gaethje versus Tony Ferguson. Those leg kicks were devastating, and I don't think all of a sudden he's going to stop throwing leg kicks. I think he's going to throw them from the first second of the fight to the last second, You
feel like that's going to be a key strategy for Justin Gaethje to take out Khabib's legs?
Most certainly. He talks about it openly, like all he needs is 4 leg kicks, or I don't know how many, I think he said 4, something like that. 4 leg kicks. And I believe him when he says that because he kicks really hard, If
you're Khabib, right, and you're getting your legs kicked out, like what do you do? As a wrestler, as someone like yourself who employs a lot of wrestling and grappling in your fights, like what do you do if your legs are being kicked out? Like how do you avoid that, and how do you implement your own plan?
If someone was kicking my legs, I'll probably try to catch the leg, try to time it, catch it, take them down off of it. Try to check them for sure. I'll try to check them, and just focus on fighting through the pain.
So I'm hearing that your strategy would be to catch the leg kicks, right? If someone's either check them or catch them, and so there's speculation, right? And folks are thinking like, well, if Justin Gaethje does open up with those leg kicks, that's actually an advantage or an opportunity for Khabib to catch him and take him down to the ground. So that's certainly something that we should be watching out for. But one of the things that you said that I'm really curious about is like fighting through the pain. And I'm wondering if you could touch on that like a little bit more. Like, what is that like to fight through the pain? And have you been in a position, whether in any of your fights, in Street Beefs or otherwise, where you've had to do that? And what is that like? Like mentally, what is that like?
The first Street Beefs fight that I had, after the first round, I was already I was done fighting. I didn't want to fight anymore. I wanted to quit. I wasn't in so much as in pain per se, but definitely my lungs, I guess they were on fire. I was, my whole body was completely sore. It wasn't really from any damage that I'd taken from the actual fight. It was just being so tired that I just had no will to fight at all. But when they said, get in here, for some reason my legs just stood up and walked in there. And when I started fighting, it's not like all of a sudden I got a second wind. I was still gassed and I still had to keep fighting through that. It's like more of a mental thing. But for the second fight, somewhere late in the third round, I started gassing out again. And I had a body lock at that point, and my arms were starting to give me real trouble. Like they were starting to fill with blood, and it was painful. But again, it was more of a mental thing for me. I just told myself to keep going, don't let go of the body lock, keep fighting. I just kept pushing. In the second fight, there was no moment in time where I said, okay, I don't feel like fighting anymore, like there was in the first fight. So I don't know. I got kicked in the nose in the second fight. That hurt, but it wasn't like something that I had to think about fighting through. So I guess I more had to fight against myself, and that mental, it's like a mental pain, if you will. I think that was the hardest thing.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good way of putting it. I mean, I love that. Like this, like you're fighting against yourself. There's like this mental pain that comes with this kind of combat, this kind of warfare, especially when it's like when both combatants are going after it. Because when you look at a lot of the Justin Gaethje and Khabib interviews lately, they're both talking about this mental toughness, right? I know that a lot of the recent interviews with Justin Gaethje, he says, I'm going to prove that I'm no B, right? He says that in all his things. Like, I just want folks to know that I'm not going to go out like no B. And so it's like, okay, this is interesting. So you see like these two dudes who are saying like, I'm mentally more tougher than you. No matter how much pain you're going to bring forward, no matter what you do to me, I will not give up. And so when you were going through that moment where it's like everything is screaming, telling you to give up, like, what are your thoughts? Like, how do you convince yourself to come back, to say, you know what, I'm not going to give up in this moment?
Oh, I touched on it earlier. It was the times that I've been through that and I kept going that I was able to pull on in that moment. Just going through it, you have to put yourself in positions to where you don't want to continue, and then you have to actually make the decision to continue, and then you have to feel what that feels like. And then when you find yourself in another spot later on in life, like how I did during that fight, it pales in comparison to what I had already gone through. And so I think that's the only thing that got me through the fight, was knowing that. And it wasn't really something that I conceptualized as I was fighting. It's just, I had already been through so much worse than that, and I made it through that, and I kept going. So the only thing, if that was my first time going through something like that, I would have quit for sure.
You shared with us a little bit off camera that you don't have a ton of MMA training, but most of your training, a lot of your training comes from being a Marine. And we know that the Marines, in terms of the different branches of the military in the United States, is one of the toughest, right? If not the toughest military branch. And I'm sure you would agree that it's the toughest as a Marine. I have family members who are Marines, and just hearing some of the training and some of the things that they put y'all through physically and mentally, right? You have training from the military, and yet a fight. You referenced your first fight and how hard that was and how much you wanted to give up, right? And so I just want to like underscore and highlight that point, because we think of these of our military men and women and service folks as some of the toughest folks on the planet, and yet you have folks that are fighting in street beefs and UFC, et cetera. These fighters who are going through just as tough of a training, if not more, right? In these combat situations. And so, yeah, I'm like thinking like how incredible these two experiences you have are, and how similar but also different they are. And going back to your fight, when you talk about you kind of guessing out, it was a heavy wrestling sort of match, right? And I think that's something that we can expect in the Justin and Khabib fight. There's going to be a heavy wrestling match. And so wondering what your thoughts are on if Khabib is able to get his hands on Justin, knowing that Justin has a wrestling background and been wrestling since he was, I think, 5 years old or something like that, like a very young age. What are your thoughts on Justin's chances of defending or wrestling with Khabib?
I think his chances are they're very good. Better than anyone else that I can think of. Because when you do wrestling, first of all, it's a natural thing to do. We as humans, we have that in us. It's our everyone's natural instinct. Most fights go to the ground. But to be in a spot where he was able to build a foundation while he himself as a human was getting built as a foundation because he was so young, I don't think that the fact that we haven't seen it in, the UFC as much as we would have liked, I don't think that means he's going to have trouble with doing it because it's just in him, It's in him. Plus, he's had people who nurtured that nature, So to answer your question, no, I don't think he'll have any trouble wrestling with Khabib.
The only challenge I have with that, right, is that I think of folks like Khabib who uses that is his primary weapon, right? And so if someone is constantly drilling it, that's their primary weapon. And I'm not saying that Justin isn't practicing defense or practicing his grappling or wrestling, but I just think that it's going to be harder for him to grapple with someone where that is their primary weapon. Where, I mean, even if you were to flip it, like, I don't think that Khabib will be able to strike with Justin because I think Justin invests so much of his time, so much of his skill set to that very tool, to that very mechanism. And so when I look at the fight, even when I've seen some of the earlier fights before he got to the UFC where he was forced to wrestle a few times, the one thing that he does do that I feel like is probably going to get Khabib some issues is that Justin does not like to be on his back. And so Justin fights, like when you look at when he was taken down, he fights his way to get back up. Like he does everything, like he explodes, he rather not be on his back. For him, it's like, I'm going to get up no matter what. But the times that he got dropped and they took him down for wrestling, he got right back up because he refuses to be on the ground. And so I'm curious, like, I wonder how much energy is going to be spent trying to get back up and wrestle with, like, to get Khabib off him than on the ground. And so I think those are probably going to be really critical, is whether Khabib can muster up the energy to continue to put him back down. And so for someone like you, like when I look at your last fight, like that was a continuing trend, right? That you were putting your opponent right back down, right back down. Can you talk about the energy that requires to put someone right back down and to hold them down too?
The energy that it requires to take someone down repeatedly and hold them down is tremendous. And if you're not careful, you can break your own spirit on accident. You're also fighting against yourself, trying not to break while you're trying to break the other person. And but I can tell you that when they finally do break down and they fall, it's the best feeling in the world, and you get like a surge of energy all of a sudden,
And when you're taking people down, what is the strategy? So if you try to sweep them or you try to trip them and it didn't work, are you going through a Rolodex of other takedowns in your mind, or you just saying, you know what, this is going to work, I'm gonna continue to do it until he falls?
I noticed that it's funny saying that I noticed that I like to, because I'm learning about myself as I fight. I noticed that I like to grab the body lock and just hang on to it and just try to take him down in different types of ways. And like, I couldn't get Darkness down, so what I did was I just decided that I was going to hang on him to weaken up his legs, because I know he's not a power lifter. Like, he doesn't have strength in his legs like that. He might have good cardio, but his muscles, eventually the muscles are going to get tired. And so I was depending on that, and I was depending on the push and the pull that I was putting on, not just the hanging on him, but also pushing and pulling on him too, to add to that weight. And then eventually that's what happened. He fell. So if one strategy doesn't work, then I just depend on the next strategy that comes to mind, and if all else fails, I just hang on him, just weigh on him, and you'll get it. As long as you don't break first, that someone has to break.
I'll go do some squats.
Yeah, exactly. Get these legs up.
Get me thinking about like my legs right now. Like my legs feeling weak.
Daniel Cormier always talks about Khabib, how good Khabib is, but he also talks about his wrestling, the wrestling that they do at AKA. And he says that, at AKA, every move is decided before it gets there. And so it's like a chain reaction. It's like, hey, I'm going to get you here, but if it doesn't work, we have a next move. And if that doesn't work, we got a next move. I wonder if Justin is going to be able to fight all those different things, right? I know that Justin is really good at creating space and distance to get his opponents off him. But I wonder if he's having to go through all those different things, can Khabib, will it play into his favor knowing that Justin, all he's going to want to do is explode. And oftentimes when he explodes, he exposes his back because that's one of the strong ways that he explodes, right? He gets on all fours, pushes up, goes against the gate, which is all the things that Khabib loves, right? He loves to get your back. When you think about that, I'm like, man, I wonder if Justin has the ability to keep Khabib off him in ways that no one else has.
Yeah, I think he might be able to get a couple shots in as he bases out to get up, but Justin's going to have to fight the hands. He's going to have to fight the hands. He's going to have to control the wrist for sure and make his way up. I think the biggest thing is he's going to need to defend the takedowns too. So he's going to have to be very calculated. Whoever breaks first is going to be the loser in this one, I think, because, they're both tough guys.
Who do you think breaks first?
Damn. If gun to my head, Khabib.
You said who?
Khabib breaks via what? In what form?
Strikes.
When you talk about like break, does that mean that he gets hit and decides I can't strike with him anymore? I'm just going to go for the legs? Or is it I get hit, it's like I'm no longer going to engage. I'm going to throw the game plan out the window.
And basically...
No, I think it's the pain, accumulation of pain. It might make you a little bit emotional, and then you might start making mistakes. And I don't think Khabib can put Gaethje in that much pain. I think he can take more pain than Khabib can give.
Mm.
The way that they distribute pain is different, right? When you think about the way that Justin, as we said earlier, is that Justin inflicts pain early on. Like his first strike is normally a leg kick, and his leg kicks are really low, so they're not even high. And so I think that's why wrestlers have a really difficult time trying to bring him down, because his leg kicks are just above the ankle. And imagine trying to pick that up, right? Trying to shoot for something that low. It's going to put you, I think, expose you in a lot of ways. And so, but I also know that Khabib's way of inflicting pain is I'm going to do it throughout the rounds. I'm going to put you on the ground, and I'm going to pin you, and I'm going to make you think about my punches. I'm going to make you think about how you cannot get out of this and how I'm so much stronger than you are.
One of the things that fascinates me about this fight as well is that, unlike boxing, which we know has a reputation for not putting fights together when they should be coming together, this is a fight that is coming together at a time when it should be, right? I mean, both Khabib and Justin have when you look at them and the stats behind them, they're in many ways, they're so equally matched.
I was looking at the stats yesterday, and I was like, man, these guys are looking at themselves in the mirror, basically.
I'm just going to throw one question out there and see your response. But if you had an opportunity to either train with Whitman or to train with Javier Mendez at AKA, who would you choose and why?
I feel like Lil Deezo has a bias right here, but go ahead.
Yeah, I would choose Trevor Whitman.
Oh, okay. Why is that?
Because I like how his whole thing is all about longevity. He's about protecting the joints, protecting the knuckles. He made those gloves, you know what I'm saying? And he pays attention to what his fighter wants. And he asks his fighter, how do you want to be as a fighter? And then they train towards that goal. And so I really appreciate all those things, longevity, especially I'm getting old, I'm 28. So that's really important to me.
It's interesting. I really thought you were going to say AKA. I mean, we know that you from San Jose. You grew up in San Jose. I'm like, that's your home team right there. But okay, that was a little curveball. I wasn't expecting that. All right. What about you, Daniel? Where would you go?
I like both camps. I certainly like Trevor Whitman. I think he's a brilliant coach. But I would want to go with AKA just because of all the wrestlers there, right? You have Cain Velasquez, you have DC, you have Luke. I just think that they have such a large team. They have a diverse set of skills, but their base is wrestling. And for myself, like, I mean, I don't fight in the same way that y'all do, but whenever I did practice or when I did do some combat sparring, like wrestling was always my go-to. Because I think, like you said, Lil Deezo is natural. Like, it's natural to want to grapple someone and slam on the ground and put them on the ground. And most fights end up there anyways. And so if I were to choose a base that I would want, it would certainly be with AKA the wrestling, kind of the dominating wrestling, getting someone to quit on the bottom. How about you, Omar?
Well, as someone who has been taken down before and pinned down and lost when I got there, I have to say AKA as well. But also because, West Coast, Northern Cali. So AKA for sure. So I have a little bit of background in jiu-jitsu, trained a little bit, and my professors would always throw me with the heavyweights, right? I walk around probably around 180, and he would always throw me with the heavyweights. And there was something about being like, knowing that, okay, these guys have a weight advantage on me, and being in those really bad positions, like there was a sense of empowerment that came from that. Like, okay, like I know what that feels like. Okay, if I'm ever put in that situation, I know certain things to expect from that situation. And so I like to throw myself into the deep water oftentimes. So I would love to go and see what it feels like to train with Khabib. Like all this strength that people talk about, like, let me see what that's like.
yeah, wrestling with the bear. Let me see what that's like.
Let me see what this human bear is all about. So, yeah, I probably would have to say AKA.
So if you were to fight any of them, right, whether that's Justin or Khabib, who would you fight according to your strengths?
Khabib.
Khabib? Why is that?
Well, I never been kicked in the leg like that. My leg might snap right in half.
I agree.
That's the main reason.
I gotta go with Lil Deezo on this one. I've bumped my shin on things before. It is one of the most excruciating pains. Just bumping your knees, not getting kicked at full strength by a baseball bat, because that's what Justin Gaethje's feet are, or legs are, a baseball bat. And that does not feel good at all. Take me down, punch me. I'll find a way to get choked out rather than get kicked in the legs.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I would say the same thing. Yeah, there's no way. I think there are certain people who just love violence, and Gaethje's one of those folks. He just loves violence, and I think no matter what you throw at him, he's going to continue to get up. He's like a zombie. And so with folks like that, you can't fight zombies, man. So for me, it's like, I'd rather just go with someone that might potentially give. Like, I'm going to go with Khabib, not saying that he will, but hey, I'd rather get taken down than getting slammed, getting punched. No matter how many times you punch him, even when you wobble him, he is just as dangerous. And so for me, it's like, you know what? Let me go with someone who's not a zombie.
I have a couple more questions, or at least one more question that I actually want to ask both of y'all, which is X factors in this game, right? So we know that both of them are coming, in particular, I think Khabib, we know, is coming into this fight in a different space, I think, spiritually and emotionally, right? With the recent loss of his father, with him now having to step up as sort of the mentor and the glue for his team. In addition to, we're in COVID, right? We don't have fans. The last time that Khabib fought in Abu Dhabi, he had the Muslim community behind him, rocking with him. And it was a lot of things that Khabib had in his corner, a lot of X factors that oftentimes we don't see sort of play out in the ring, but are certainly in mind and spirit that he won't have this time around. And then with Justin Gaethje, we sort of touched on it a little bit before around, just his evolution. So, what do y'all think are some of the X factors and that we should be keeping in mind and that might play out in this fight?
I think the X factors are going to be past experiences, where they've been leading up to this point, and who's able to draw on that, the most effectively, if you will.
Can you give me an example?
Just all the times, just individually, whatever times that they've gone through in their life to where they didn't think that they were going to make it through, and then they made it through, and then, doing that over and over again. And that's the best preparation I think that either of them could have had. And I'm sure that they've both been in plenty of those types of situations to get them to where they are now, So we'll see. It's gonna be a crazy battle.
And if you were a betting man, who would you say that has the most X factors coming into this fight?
If I had to make an assumption, I would say probably Khabib. Probably.
When we talk about these big fights, like I'm always thinking about and paying attention to things outside of their skill level inside the ring, right? So things that I already mentioned, Khabib losing his father, COVID, and the impact that has on training, etc. So I guess I'm thinking about, the circumstances outside of people's control and how that will have an impact on both fighters and who it would have more of an impact on, right? And if I had to say who might be bringing in more things that can potentially take their focus away, oh man, yeah, I'm always concerned, like when big changes in life happen. And so I don't know. I feel like if Khabib is really mentally strong, but also I'm really concerned with how he's going to be coming in without having his father in his corner this time around. So that's something that I'm just going to be paying attention to and seeing if that changes his game at all.
And not only that, he has his whole team. His whole team is fighting, right? And so I also think that that's an additional pressure for anyone who knows, like knowing that your team member is going to go out and fight before you, and then that they might potentially lose in the way that it impacts you. Like I remember watching Anderson Silva way back in the day when his team members would go fight before him, the Nogueira brothers, right? When they lost or when they win, you would see Anderson Silva in the back in the locker room as he's warming up crying. And so I know that has an impact. Anthony Pettis said that before, right? When his younger brother, Sergio Pettis, would fight, he said that plagued him when he saw that his Sergio would lose and then he has to go out there and fight knowing like, hey, I got to put my family's name on my back. I got to make sure I got to recover my brother's loss. And in doing that, he ends up losing himself. And so you have two brothers like both losing, or you have teammates losing, and the way that impacts you before you go out into a fight. And so I certainly agree with you that might play a huge factor into this fight.
I think sometimes it could just, the way it plays out is that you might quit earlier because you don't have the support system that you're used to having that keeps you strong and on point. Maybe not. Maybe it could be the other way. I don't know. These are all speculation and assumptions, but certainly all add to the narrative and to what will play out this coming up. Well, when this, UFC 254.
There is something to be said about the not having your cornerman there, because just from my own personal experience, from my first fight to the second fight, I think the X factor for me was having a cornerman who I know and I love and I trust to talk to be that voice to listen for while I'm fighting, So that can make a huge difference, definitely.
Yeah, I'm curious if I can just explore that just for a quick second. You didn't have the cornerman for the first fight? Is that what it was?
Yeah, I had no one, yeah.
And so what was that like to have no one there as you're going from one round to the next?
I like to consider myself mentally strong, so the only thing I was thinking about in between fights was relax, breathe, relax, breathe. I wasn't thinking about the fight, so that was okay in between rounds. But the main difference was when we were actually fighting, that's where the cornerman came into play. And
in the second fight, you were able to hear your cornerman?
Oh yeah, very clearly. Yeah. He's my best friend from the Marine Corps, actually. He's also my next door neighbor, so that was tremendous.
Give him a shout out.
Yeah. Jesus Quintero, what's up? You know what I'm saying? Thank you for being there for me. Everybody watching this who knows Quintero, you know what I'm talking about.
Before your second fight, you actually shout out a name when they did the fighter intro. Yeah, I thought that was moving. I mean, I didn't have any context to it, but I was like, okay, there's something there that isn't being said that you're honoring. And so did you want to talk a little bit about that or just mention that?
Yeah, I shout out my wife, my 3 sons, and my, one of my best friends from my youth, Sammy Spencer, who um, he's passed on now. But that affected me, when he died. It affected me, and it it's sad, And when I think about him, I can almost feel his energy, because I remember what it's like to be around him and the feelings that I had while I was around him. So I get euphoric recall on that, and that's also something that keeps me going too. Not to quit, because of all the loved ones who I've lost, who are watching me from heaven, and they don't want me to quit. They want me to keep going. So I draw on that a lot.
Yeah, well, I'm curious if Khabib's going to be drawing from the same source, right? Knowing that his father just passed, having his name in memory, and being able to draw on that, because he knows that his father, whether he's physically here or he's spiritually here, that his father will be pushing and supporting him through the fight. So thanks for, sharing that. I mean, that's really deep stuff, because that is the spiritual aspect of fighting. That's the emotional, the psychological, like all those things. Like when we talk about fighting, we are tapping into all those different spheres. And so thanks for bringing that element into this, because it's important for people to recognize that. It's important for people to understand that we're not physically training, but we're training all aspects of ourselves for combat. Right? And so I appreciate that, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate y'all for doing what you do, definitely.
And I know that you're going to be fighting soon, right? Is that right?
Yeah, November 14. I don't know who I'm fighting yet, but
where's it going to be at? It's going to be at the Streetbeefs Westcoast event, right? 3?
Yeah, Streetbeefs Westcoast 3, I think in Vegas. The same venue as last time. I'm pretty sure it's the same venue, which is nice too, because, I've already stepped in there at one point. I know what it's like to be up in there, and I know the dimensions. That's the main thing. I know the dimensions, where the walls are, how to use them. So I've been training that a lot.
Folks, make sure you catch his fight. I'm certain it's going to be a good one. And much luck to you, my brother. Appreciate it.
Thanks. You guys have a great one.
Lil Deezo, before we let you go, where can folks find you? Do you have social media that folks can follow you on?
Yeah, you can find me on the gram at Lil Deezo 408. Yeah.
Thank you for tuning in. Hopefully you were able to gather some insight to help you see the fight differently. If you like what you heard, like what you saw, please subscribe to the channel. And if you haven't heard already, we dropped and we launched our Heart in a Fight merch.
You got me.
When you can, please go to our Teespring store and copy some. Until then, dig deep and double down on your own commitments to your life.